Is this not now the lowest point of a dire Conservative campaign? This surely has to be the lowest point. Not just because of the general lack of thinking behind the attack on Keir Starmer, the stupidity of the real-world practicalities of what they're arguing for, that a person cannot have any downtime from their work ever, even if the practicalities weren't completely insane, which they are. They have said so much and done so much to display the opposite view that they're now trying to argue for, that they instantly show themselves to be massive hypocrites. It's not just a completely irrational and impractical thing to argue for, but unbelievably stupid because it can be shown almost instantly that you've done the very things that you are now saying shouldn't be done. And I think that this kind of tawdry, slightly practical joker playground style of political campaigning is now so clearly visible from space to the vast majority of people and so despised that there isn't really a soul among us that is going to be persuaded by any of this, because everyone sees it, I think, for what it is. Now, the Tory campaign is pushing that Keir Starmer will be a, quote, part-time Prime Minister. The Defence Secretary tweeted some absolute nonsense about military action usually happening after dark, and would a PM Starmer be ready to do that if he decided to knock off? I mean, it is such unserious, unadulterated, demeaning nonsense, this. Of course, Prime Ministers need to have time to switch off. There isn't a person on the planet who would work well by working every hour God sends. And Conservative Prime Ministers of the current and the past know this too. David Cameron very famously talked about having date nights with his wife. Woe betide any of us who work for Theresa May if you were thinking of trying to bother her with something trivial on a Saturday morning. That time was fiercely protected in her diary because that was the time she went to the gym or went shopping in the local supermarket. It had to be something absolutely massive for Saturday mornings to be compromised by something to do with work. Sunak himself has taken holidays as Prime Minister. He's had time apparently at a spin class in California listening to Taylor Swift or something. And which Prime Minister was it that took time out of his diary to go and write a book on Winston Churchill? But you know how this kind of playground politics works because we've seen it develop over the years. Because you start with the kernel of something, in this case, Keir Starmer's protection of his Friday evenings. Oh, and by the way, failed to add here, his wife is Jewish, so Shabbat is pretty important in their house. So you start with the kernel of something, and then the attempt is made to amplify the notion that Starmer would be a part-time Prime Minister by essentially lying about what was said. Maria Caulfield, listen to this, she's a health minister and was caught out on Sky News earlier attempting to do just that.
As a minister, it's not really that feasible. I note that probably what you're alluding to is Keir Starmer saying he's going to be doing a 4-day week and finishing at 6 o'clock every evening.
No, he didn't say a 4-day week. He said he was going to finish work at 6 on a Friday, like many people do. And I believe that's to help his wife observe her Jewish faith, which is commonplace amongst Jewish people. So not a 4-day week. That's not true.
Well, I'm a person of faith as well. And so the work-life balance is extremely important. But he has indicated that he wants to kind of have a more flexible working life approach. That's just not possible.
I really, really don't know the point that Maria Caulfield is trying to make at the end there. It's important to have work-life balance when you're in very stressful and important jobs. You make better decisions if you're able to strike a balance. But also, you've got to realise that it is really important. You're going to have to work a lot and you're not going to be... Do we not think Keir Starmer realises that? Or that people accept that? Or that there have been instances where Prime Ministers in the past, Conservative Prime Ministers in the past, have also taken time for themselves, full in the knowledge that if the bombs start raining down on us or something absolutely dreadful happens, they're going to have to pick up the phone and go back to work. Of course they are. It is completely mad. Who is falling for this kind of attack here? What is of apparent concern? Here's what Keir Starmer is saying this afternoon about this so-called row.
Look, this is just increasingly desperate stuff. I actually can hardly believe that 48 hours before an election, the Conservative Party has got nothing possible positive to say as they go into this. I've been arguing throughout this campaign, you'll have heard me many times saying they haven't changed, they're just the same, nothing's going to change. And they're proving it. Because they are not saying, look, if you vote Tory, vote Conservative on Thursday, these things will happen. They're just in this negative, desperate loop. And it is really desperate. My family is really important to me, as they will be to every single person watching this. And I just think it's increasing desperation, bordering on hysterical now.
Do you think that's right? Hysterical, desperate, or a case to be argued for? I can't see it myself because the practicalities of it are obviously crazy, that you would expect someone to work every hour God sends. Nobody expects that, even if you're Prime Minister. And there have been instances where Conservative Prime Ministers have done exactly the same as Keir Starmer, trying to find ways in which they can manage their family life with their work life. It is just so desperate. I'm not even making this up. The tweet that the current Defence Secretary wrote. Grant Shapps said, virtually every military intervention we've carried out has happened at night, partly to keep our servicemen and women safe. The British people will wonder who would be standing in for Starmer between 6 p.m. and 9 a.m. Angela Rayner, David Lammy, Ed Miliband. Defending Britain's security isn't a daylight hours only job. Notwithstanding that doesn't actually deal with the fact of what Keir Starmer said, it is just such palpable nonsense, isn't it? Because the same thing was not said by the Shadow Defence Secretary of David Cameron when he had date night with his wife, or Theresa May when she set aside Saturday morning as the time for her to be able to go to the gym or do the shopping, or Sunday morning to go to church. Well, who's going to man the country on a Sunday morning when the Prime Minister's taking communion? It is beyond ridiculous. Does Sir Keir Starmer get that he might not be able to ring-fence family time as PM?
Yes, he does. I think what he actually said was, it would have to be something in extremis, but I sort of don't know whether to laugh or cry at this discussion, really. I thought, Tom, you sort of made the argument there about how if you follow this through, it becomes absurd, the idea
yes.
that, of course, people in politics have got families, and having a family sort of involves seeing them from time to time. And I think that, in reality, people know that. And I think... Mm-hmm. As I say, don't know whether to laugh or cry at the Tories making an issue of this.
One of your colleagues, Greg Hands, asked what would happen if Putin attacked at 6:01 p.m. What do you think would if Keir Starmer were Prime Minister?
So his quiet evening in would get rapidly disturbed. And the reality is that it's a 24/7 job. And, I think we all of us as politicians, certainly as ministers, try to, plan to have time in an orderly fashion with our families. I have a sort of unwritten rule that Sundays aren't outward facing, so they're at home in a domestic sense. But I usually have a box which probably is, 4 hours of my Sunday, and then, stuff happens. So, whilst, of course, he will want to spend some time with his family, it's a strange thing for him to put out there. It just feels like he's trying to, make himself feel sort of, normal and down.
Why is it a strange thing to put out there if it's what you do too?
Well, I mean, it's we are humans as well as politicians.
Absolutely.
But it's an odd thing to feel one has to raise and express, because the reality is that.
But he was asked a question.
He
was asked a question in an interview. What do you do to have time with the family, given the pressures of your current job as being leader of the opposition? And that's what he said.
He has a Friday night, and obviously his wife is Jewish, so Friday night is an important part of that, and that's fine. But I think
hang on, you're calling him a part-time Prime Minister. Your colleagues are suggesting that Putin will attack with some abandon at the minute the clock strikes 6. This is ridiculous, Anne-Marie.
No, well, I think Greg Hands' challenge of 6:01 is if one gives any indication to those who would wish us and our citizens harm, that there might be a gap in one's attention. That's really the point.
I see. So David Cameron should not have been having date nights with his wife when he was Prime Minister.
Well, again,
Theresa May should not have been having Saturday mornings in the gym. Boris Johnson should not have been spending time away from going to those Cobra meetings in the early part of COVID to be writing his book about Shakespeare.
I think all of these things are perfectly normal, and we all, even as Prime Ministers, try to do that. I think the point is that you can't predict when you're a Cabinet Minister or indeed Prime Minister, in that orderly fashion. But I have no problem with him planning to do that. I think that's quite right. And as he says, he does it now. I think the point is there's a sort of I don't know. I think the word I would use is naivety in setting out that there's going to be that sort of orderliness should he become Prime Minister, because it's just not like that.
I don't think the suggestion in the clip that's been circulating is that he thinks it's going to be very orderly and every night he can pop up to the Downing Street flat at 6 p.m. and that'll be that. It is. What do you think it says about the Conservative campaign that it is attacking someone for doing something that you yourself have said is completely ordinary and human and would be very nice to do?
Well, I think it's the suggestion that somehow he's going to have it all under control and that it's a job that is in the normal way of things. It just isn't. For me, it just expresses naivety to suggest that one wants to put that out, particularly at this point, other than to say, it's going to be completely fine. The reality is, the point about Putin and 601 is that it is unpredictable. It's full on. It's 24/7.
Do you genuinely think Keir Starmer doesn't realise that?
Well, I hope he realises that, because if the polls are right and he takes the job, his life is about to get turned completely upside down.